Hey friends, are you interested in working with Delta Lake but don't know PySpark, don't know Scala, can't write SQL? Data flows might be your solution for an easy no-code ETL path. Let's get to it. Hello friends again, my name is Austin Leibel. I am a trainer at Pragmatic and I do work inside of Azure with T-SQL, with different products of the Power Platform like Power BI and paginated reports in the Power BI Report Builder. Today though, we're going to be continuing our series around the Delta Lake. We've gone through and we've talked about what Delta Lake is. We have created a Delta table. We have also modified that Delta table using PySpark, but what happens if people don't necessarily know how to go through and write one of those code languages? Well, data flows inside of Data Factory and Synapse Analytics could be the solution for enabling more people within our organization to go through and make modifications to our Delta tables. In Azure Synapse and Data Factory, data flows are serverless data integration service that allow you to build and manage ETL or extract, transform, load processes using a visual interface with scaled out Apache Spark clusters. So data flows in Azure Synapse provide a low-code, code-free, scalable approach to ingest, transform, and load data from various sources, such as an Azure Data Lake storage, into another solution. Working with Delta tables is one of those solutions that we can work with. With data flows, you can easily go through, transform, manipulate data using various built-in transformations, such as joins, filters, aggregations, data type conversions. And overall, data flows in Azure Synapse simplify and accelerate the process of data integration, enabling people to go through and deliver insights faster and more reliably. Well, one of the things we can work with, because we are using a scaled out Spark cluster, is we can work with Delta inside of a data flow. We have to do something a little more different maybe than we're used to if you're very familiar with data flows. Instead of creating an integration data set or a data set inside of Data Factory, we're going to go through and work with something called an inline data set. Inline data sets are a feature in data flows that allow you to go through and create or manipulate small in-memory data sets using a visual interface. So with an inline data set, you can create complex, small data sets without having to set up any external data sources or define complex data structures. Delta is one of those structures that you can reference, and that's what we're going to do inside of this data flow source and sink. So we're going to go through, check out our Synapse workspace, and go work with a data flow now. Let's go check it out. All right, so I'm inside of my Synapse Analytics workspace. So I already have a data flow up and running. I have data flow debug on. If you want to know more about data flows, definitely check out my series I did just a few months ago around data flows, kind of from start to finish with the different transformations and things like that. So to start with, I'm going to go ahead and give this data flow a name. I'm just going to call this modify Delta. This is going to just go through and modify my Delta table inside of my data lake. Now, what I need to do to start with is I need to add in a source transformation to this data flow. So I'm going to come over and I'm going to click on the add source option and click on the add source again. Now, typically it is a best practice to go through and label what your sources and your sinks are inside of data flows. So what I'm going to call this here is I'm going to say this is my Delta source. We're actually going to be pointing to the same exact place for our source and sink in the run of this data flow. We're going to be pointing to our Delta table we created earlier in this video series. Now, as we go through and start working with this, normally you might go and just immediately select the data set that you already have that exists inside of your environment. You can see I have a serverless SQL on-demand data set that I can use to write serverless SQL inside of a confined integration data set. But instead of doing that and going through and creating a connection to that, I'm going to use an inline data set instead, which is just going to define my data set, where I'm getting my data from in this specific data flow. So this is much less reusable, but it is going going to allow us the capability of working with Delta inside of a data flow, which is awesome. So I'm going to go through and select my inline dataset type. You can see there are many different options here, but I'm going to go through and just select my Delta option. Now, once I do that, I do need to still affiliate some sort of linked service, some sort of connection string, the ability to connect with that data. Luckily, since a Delta table exists inside of my data lake, I already have a default storage link service that was created when this Synapse Analytics workspace was created. So I'm going to go ahead and select that for myself. And you might think, okay, awesome, I'm done. We can go through and start working with Delta, but not quite yet. What we're going to have to do is we're going to go over to our source options, because we also have to tell our Synapse data flow where our folder path is. What Delta table do we want to work with? So I'm going to go through and use the browse option to make sure I can point specifically to my Delta table. So this is going to be me picking my container in this option right here. I'm going to pick my Delta directory, and ultimately I will point to my employees Delta table as my subdirectory here. So I'm going to select that for myself and click OK, and you can see that automatically fills out that folder path for us. Now, we talked about time travel and some of the other options inside of our Delta series, but we do have the ability to also enable time travel right here. We have it disabled by default, but we can query by a timestamp or potentially query by a version as well, which is awesome. Now, if I want to go through and work with a Delta table, I do need to go ahead and import my schema to be able to have my different column names inside of this data flow. So the ability to do that is only allowed when you have Dataflow Debug on and you are operating inside of that Spark cluster. But once I go through and I import my projection, my column names, my data types, things like that, I will also be able to go through and get a live preview of what my data looks like at this point in time, which is again one of the very powerful functions of working inside of data flows. This data preview option right here allows me to go through and see what my data looks like at this point in time. So again, this is a really powerful way to go through and verify if you're not familiar with those different code languages and how to transform data and what a potential transformation would look like when you go through and enable it inside of your data flow. You have the ability to go and look at that there. Were columns removed? Were they not removed? How did this alter things? How did my filter change what I'm working with? How did my derived column go through and add a new column? What does it look like? Things like that are very useful when people are just getting started with making transformations in the ETL process. We have our different column names here and data types, so that is great. I'm also going to go through and just get my data preview loaded as well. Again, we can just see what the current version of our Delta table looks like. By default, this is going to go through and see the changes we made in the last video and reflect those as our Delta table. So remember, we went through and we made some modifications. We removed Austin Leibel from this employees table. We added a few employees as well. We made some modifications to Mitchell Pearson's data. So we're going to go through and we're going to continue to work with this same Delta table over and over again. All right, let's go through and do some sort of transformation. Let's remove a record from this table so we can go through and then run this data flow ultimately. Now I'm going to go through and I'm going to add in a transformation. Now the transformation I'm going to add in is going to be an alter row transformation. So by clicking that plus icon, I have the ability to go through and look at all my different transformations currently available to me inside of the Dataflow user interface. And I want to go through and do an alter row. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to delete a record. This alter row transformation is going to allow me to insert, upsert, delete, update, different modifications to our Delta table. Now our alter row condition that we're going to use, we're just going to use a really basic one here just to show off the functionality. So we're going to go and we're going to delete a record. We're going to delete the record if... And then I can go over here and click inside of this box right here, and this is going to allow me to either type in the expression I want to use to delete that record, or potentially open the expression builder as well, which makes it really easy to go through and point exactly to where you want to work with. Now I'm going to delete a record based on the employee ID. So I have this because I imported the schema. I have my employee ID here. I'm going to say the employee ID is equal, and you actually have to do a double equal sign if you want to do that. And I'm going to say to record 1. So this is going to go through delete employee ID 1 for this specific data flow. So I can see this looks good. Employee ID equals 1. We're going to go through and delete that specific record. Now, to do a data preview of this again, we can see exactly how this is going to change our Delta table. Now, potentially, you might have thousands, millions of records inside of this. So this is only going to give you a data preview of about up to 1,000 records or so. So we can just go through and verify that it is going to delete our record that we want. Obviously, this is maybe not going to be the use case you're using all the time, just deleting one specific record, but you could delete hundreds potentially of records in one data flow as well. So we can see that there is an X icon here next to my employee ID 1 that says it is going to delete this specific operation, Mitchell Pearson right here. Perfect. Now, the next thing I want to do is I'm just going to go through, I'm satisfied with the change that I'm making, so I'm going to go through and just add in my sync transformation as well. So all the way at the bottom, this is going to say where I'm going to now load this data to. So I'm going to give this a name as well. Again, as a best practice, I want to kind of specify exactly what I'm doing here. This is going to be my Delta sync. So again, what I want to go and enable for myself is my inline data set. And I'm going to do just as I did in the source. I'm going to go through and select my Delta data set type, check my linked service, and then also go over to my settings and choose that folder path just like I did earlier, because I'm going to write the data and read the data from the Delta table and then write data to that all in the same run there. So we have our folder path filled out, our container name followed by Delta employees. That is perfect. We do have the ability to vacuum here. There are a lot of Delta options for optimizing writes and compacting and merging schema. But the main thing I need to do with this specific data flow is I need to uncheck allow insert and make sure I do check allow delete, because if I do not have that selected for myself, it will not know to go through and delete anything. I will get some sort of error. Now I do have to specify the column that I'm going to be deleting on, so I have to specify my key column, which is going to be my employee ID. But from that point, I'm really good to go. Now, one thing you should know about data flows, this is your first kind of foray into looking at the user interface here, is I can't actually go through and just run a data flow from this user interface right here. If I want to run this data flow, I'm actually going to have to pull that inside of a pipeline inside of my Integrate Hub. So I'm going to have to go create a pipeline and actually execute this data flow inside of a pipeline. You cannot run a data flow itself just naturally, so we're going to go and run that there. Let's go check out how to do that as well. So I'm going to go over to my Integrate Hub over in my Synapse Hub list over here, and I'm going to add in a new pipeline. So I'm not going to give this one a name, just want to go through and quickly run this so we can see the functionality of how that's going to work. I'm going to bring over my data flow activity inside of my Synapse kind of canvas here, and I'm going to go through and I'm just going to, for my settings, select the data flow that I just created, my modified Delta. You can see because I have data flow debug up and running now, I can go ahead and actually just debug this and run this in its current state, but typically you would probably associate some sort of trigger with this, run it at a scheduled time, and it would have to go through and kick up a Spark cluster whenever that executes. All right, so I'm going to go ahead, click on the run option here. This is going to take just a few minutes for me to go through and execute, so probably be back here in just about 30 seconds or 40 seconds on my end, but it's going to be instant on your end, so I'll see you in just a moment. All right, so we were able to go through and we were able to run our pipeline successfully, which when executed our data flow. In order to go check out our results though, let's head over to the Data Hub and let's make sure that our Delta table has been updated with that record. So I'm going to go in the Data Hub, I'm going to go to my linked data and open up my container where I have that Delta table, and then I'll go over and run a serverless SQL on-demand query against that Delta table there to verify that that record number 1 was deleted for myself inside of the span of the data flow execution there. So we're going to go through and have the ability to look at the Delta tables inside of Synapse specifically, not Data Factory necessarily. But this functionality with working with data flows and Delta would work inside of Data Factory as well. So if you're interested in learning more about how to do execution with data flows and pipelines and anything like that, definitely check out our on-demand learning platform, or potentially join us in one of our live 3 or 4 day boot camps where we really dive deep into all of this functionality here. Well, this looks perfect. We went and deleted record 1. Mitchell Pearson is gone. We have removed him from our employee table. We can see that there. Again, we do have the ability to go through and see our Delta log here as well. This is going to be our transaction 4, if you will. So this is our version 4 of this Delta table. So we've gone through and executed that successfully. Hopefully you enjoyed this one. We got one more episode as part of this series where we're going to talk about just what is a data lakehouse, talk about the integration of Delta and a data lakehouse as well, and then kind of start wrapping this one up. So hopefully you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you in the next one.